Okay, guys, so we need to finish with some stuff on Harry Truman and knock him out before we go on to Eisenhower and the 50s, and then JFK in the 60s, then after that, Nixon and onward. Okay, so Harry Truman has a domestic policy called the Fair Deal. It's really built in the mold of FDR's New Deal. Don't get confused. I know you also learned about TR's Square Deal. There are deals everywhere. Every president has a deal for the American people. So the Fair Deal had a lot of initiatives within it that, some of them would sound familiar to you as talking points when you're hearing people campaign today. Harry Truman wanted universal health care. He's not going to get that, but it was an agenda point way back then. He had a lot of just initiatives that were more expansive with government. He vetoed something called the Taft-Hartley Act, which was focused on kind of ameliorating the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act was something that was passed under FDR, which made labor unions stronger. Taft-Hartley allowed for something that exists today called a right to work state. You didn't have to be a member of a union if a union formed to be able to work in that profession. So Harry Truman didn't like that bill, and that's what that's all about. It's one of your learning objectives. But regardless, people were a little tired of some of these government initiatives because remember, FDR had been elected 4 times. So some of that is kind of people like change. They wanted to do something different. Also, though, Harry Truman's popularity was falling because of something that he did that I actually think was extremely principled, and it will split the Democratic Party. What was that? So after the war, there was an incident in which a soldier came home, and he happened to be black, and he got on a bus in Georgia to take a ride home to South Carolina where he lived, and he had to go to the bathroom. And back then, Greyhound buses did not have bathrooms on them. So he asked the bus driver to pull over, and the bus driver thought that he was being a little forward, especially because he was black and he was back in the South, and who did he think he was, just because he had been a soldier fighting in World War II. So what ends up happening is the bus driver does pull over when he sees a sheriff that he knows in South Carolina. What ends up happening is the sheriff actually is so violent, he takes his baton and he punches out the guy's eyes, which is horrific. And eventually Harry Truman hears about this case, the treatment of the soldier, and he is horrified. And he does look at black soldiers. You had people like the Tuskegee Airmen as well during World War II, and wants to honor that service. And for him, it was even more sickening because this guy was still in uniform, even though he'd just been discharged. So what he does is he says, all right, guys, by executive order, I'm going to integrate the military. And that was a giant thing. That happened in 1948 as Truman is approaching an election. Now, this action of his is kind of twofold. It has 2 different purposes. One is moral. I mean, I honestly believe Harry Truman, who, interestingly enough, his mother was like an unreconstructed Confederate. It's probably apocryphal, but it said that she would never even sleep in the Lincoln bedroom. Like, she was like a Confederate, right? But so I don't know what his feeling like. I mean, I don't want to say Harry Truman was perfect on race, because dude was not. It wasn't. It was the 1940s. But he knew that this was wrong, and he wants to take a step to rectify the country. And hey, by the way, this is the Cold War, and what is the Soviet Union going to be beating us up on? In part, the fact that we have this racial hierarchy at home. That's going to help us with the civil rights movement, because sometimes when you have someone hold a mirror up to you, you go, oh yeah, that's ugly. So he does this executive order to integrate the armed forces, in part because of principle. But he has a second reason. politics. He's losing a lot of voters who felt that even though he was following in the New Deal, like I said, with the Fair Deal, but he had replaced another guy named Henry Wallace as FDR's vice president. And Henry Wallace was like super far left. Henry Wallace was really sympathetic to a lot of communist ideas. And there were some progressives, and I'm talking like the little P progressives, they're still around, who really liked Henry Wallace more. And so Truman knows he's going to lose some votes because Henry Wallace decides in 1948 he's going to run against him as a third-party candidate. So you have to make up those votes. And who could he make up those votes with? There are black voters in the North who will like his executive order, and he thinks he can pick those up. So one, he does this out of principle. Two, he does this, politically speaking, to get voters. Now, who is in the Democratic Party who probably will not like integration? Those are Southern Democrats, right? The South is still in yellow dog Democrat territory, though. They would rather vote for a Democrat, or rather vote for a yellow dog than a Republican. So Harry Truman feels completely safe in making them mad. He's like, you know, what are you guys going to do? You're not going to vote for Henry Wallace because the South was not super progressive, and you're not going to vote for the Republican. So I can make you mad. Well, what happens is a third guy kind of says, no, Truman, you can't. His name is Strom Thurmond. He was a Democrat in South Carolina, and he will peel off and he will start the Dixiecrat party, and he will run against Truman from that angle. Well, what does that mean? Well, the Democratic Party is all sorts of fractured, like it was under Al Smith. And no one thought that Harry Truman was going to win the election. He's going to lose several states in the South who are going to vote for Strom Thurmond. He's going to lose progressive voters voting for Henry Wallace. He is going to pick up some black voters, but it's looking, people are tired of the Democrats in office. They've been there forever. What happens? Everyone's like, guys, you don't even need to, I mean, it's obvious that Thomas Dewey, who was been a Republican governor in New York, was going to kind of take it. I mean, Thomas Dewey didn't even really have to campaign that hard. It was like a foregone conclusion that Truman was going to lose. The newspaper, one of them even had a first edition that said that Dewey won. And you know what? It was wrong because everyone woke up the morning after the election and it was like Harry Truman won the election despite this big fractured everything. It was shocking. So when people tell you that elections, that there haven't been any really big surprise elections in the past, nothing's new, man. Nothing's new. Harry Truman beating Thomas Dewey was wow. Okay? And then in his second term, Truman is going to be a little weaker as a result of that. Close, narrow squeak out. And he's going to lose popularity because of some of the foreign affairs stuff that I've talked about in previous videos. Losing China, the Soviets becoming nuclear, that kind of thing. All right? I hope that helps. Bye.